any artist, whatever they're shooting, is their own critic, has to be able to critique their work, has to be able to understand where and how to develop.
Welcome to the SheClicks Women in Photography podcast. I'm Angela Nicholson, and I'm the founder of SheClicks, which is a community for female photographers. In these podcasts, I talk to women in the photographic industry to hear about their experiences, what drives them, and how they got to where they are now. In this episode, I speak with Tania Freimuth, who developed a passion for photography with a simple camera in childhood. She later studied art at university, but transitioned to cinematography and then began creating music videos before becoming a successful director of photography and a Canon ambassador. Hi, Tania. Thank you so much for joining me today on the SheClicks Women in Photography podcast. It's great to see you.
And you, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to be here.
Thank you. So you first got started in photography at a really young age. How did that come around?
I think my grandparents had, do you remember those little Instamatic? They were kind of like oblong things.
Oh, yeah.
With a really old-fashioned little Perspex flash bulb that you jammed on top. And I guess I was always sort of encouraged to occupy myself. And I think I must have started occupying myself with, taking snaps with that. And my grandparents, as grandparents, their benevolence always must have processed them all, and it just kind of encouraged me onwards.
Yeah.
And then I moved from that happy snappies, I call them now, to, I guess, what you'd compare to a rangefinder. I don't remember the brand, but suddenly I was going from little cassettes to 35mm. And I have to say, when I opened that Christmas present, I was, probably a bit confused, discombobulated, because I was like, wait, what is this? And if I'm honest, I felt like the challenge of moving up to 35mm had kind of stolen my sort of joy of doing it. But I did eventually figure out how to load the film, how to expose it. And of course, that's all judgment by eye, because there's nothing about those cameras that is automatic.
Yeah. So what age were you when you opened the 35mm camera?
I think probably about 10.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah, it was one of those Christmas presents where you've been given something amazing and you're like, oh, I don't know what to do with this.
Yes, you're not going to be playing with it that afternoon.
No, and that now you've got this massive learning curve to go on, which, it was a bit daunting. I didn't really have anybody. I mean, my dad's a photographer, or he is now a professional photographer.
Uh-huh.
At the time, it was a hobby for him. And I knew I just wasn't going to have anybody there to help me do it. I knew I was going to be chucked in the deep end, which is he does have a penchant for that.
Yeah, for the first few times you do it, it's quite a stressful, fiddly thing, pulling that tab of film across and pushing it onto the sprockets and, winding it on manually in many cases.
Yeah. And then, you've got to kind of learn about aperture and what the heck is that? And then on top of that, it's, you've got to judge distance. So it's like a lot of things all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you learn all that by yourself, or did you go to any classes or anything?
No classes. I just learnt it by myself. I guess making mistakes. I don't have any recollection of any of the pictures that I took in the early days, but it was really a process of elimination, if you like, later on. I think I probably started taking photographs with it when I was about 16 or so.
Did you have any female role models or any photographers that you looked up to whose work you wanted to emulate?
No. I mean, I think it's difficult to appreciate the difference between life now and life then. I think if there'd been the internet, yes would be the answer, because, latterly, I like Eve Arnold's work, and Evelyn Hoffer, her work is lovely. And there's a documentary photographer called Tish Murta. I think there's a documentary out about her now.
Yeah.
And I guess my biggest influences were photojournalists, actually, because, we always had the Sunday newspapers. And at that time, I think he was called Harold Evans, the editor of the Times. He really supported photojournalism. So I was seeing work by those artists, and maybe unwittingly seeing work by Jane Bowen, for instance. and there's another lady, Lee Miller. And, maybe I was seeing their work but not knowing it was them, because photojournalism was the biggest influence on my choices of, photography, the kind of photography that I was going to do. That's reached forwards to my cinematography, actually.
And do you do any photography for yourself now?
Yeah, so now, although you're working on projects is such a slow journey. You've got to think of the project, you've got to work the project through, you've got to, and then allocate the time, which when you're balancing, earning a living, because photography is not something I primarily earn a living by. And I've sort of ring-fenced it with purpose, because I really wanted to be able to do something creative that was simply for me. And I always find once money gets involved, 9 times out of 10, you've got a brief. Of course you have a brief and requirements. So it's so I sort of ring fence it and do my own personal projects with it, which hopefully then I exhibit, and then hopefully somebody will buy them.
So what sort of thing is typically one of your projects? Are they very varied?
No, I mean, I used to do a lot of street photography, and those would sort of take I guess I'd be the sort of, the travelling photographer with mates, or, on adventures, backpacking adventures, and that sort of carried forward. I mean, sometimes I'd just be allocated the role, which was great. But I recognised that unless you had, I sort of felt something was missing, I suppose, and I was very fortunate to work with a photographer called Jez Dixon, who actually works in the wedding photography market, who was going through a bit of a changeover for himself with his photography. And he made me aware of that, my work would have more substance or authenticity or integrity to an audience if I could focus on a subject. So my inspiration generally comes from art, because before I went down a sort of camera and lens route, I was really kind of like, I'd like to be an artist, probably like a lot of people. But I sort of lost my confidence in my abilities, and so, that's where the photography came in. But it now remains my greatest source of, I guess, inspiration. And then the other thing I've got is a weird obsession about and the elements that are out of that are time. I've sort of become aware I'm trying to somehow freeze time, hold a moment, savour a moment. And then the sort of aspect of there just being one thing. You don't have to have hundreds of something for it to be of value. You can just have one thing, which, as I say it now, sounds like stating the bleeding obvious, but volume is a big thing in our society. More, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I guess those are the elements that I've looked at.
And you said, hopefully exhibit and sell your prints. Is that always the end goal for you, putting a certain number of images together that are printed and exhibited?
Yeah. I mean, I've only managed it once. Because it's a whole other skill set, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. And I think people completely underestimate how much work is involved. It's one thing having the images, but actually putting a cohesive exhibition together, printing them, finding somewhere to show them, getting them on the wall, whole different thing.
Yeah, massive journey. I mean, one of the big mistakes I made with the project that I was working on most recently was not how they were printed. I wanted them to be big, so they're sort of 20 by 16. I managed to find a printer that could embrace what I was trying to achieve, which in itself was quite difficult. Most people just did not understand. So I did need to make some compromises. But also I didn't understand that I'd need to back them. So they're on quite thick paper, but actually for them to hold their own. So yeah, I feel like a bit of a numpty in that respect. But unless you make the mistake, unless you're going to college where you can learn these things, if you're flying by the seat of your pants, you kind of got to learn in the field, I suppose.
Yeah, as every day's a school day, but also you just don't know what you don't know until you come up against it. And if you start a project, that's how you'll discover the things you need to learn, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, so the guy took to sort out the frames. He was like, well, next time. And some people can be really gruff, but they mean it with kindness. Well, next time, just come here first, will you? So I suppose, he must have liked them and just felt impatient.
Yeah. And could also see that you were going to do it again.
Yeah, which was nice, actually. And I will go back there because I think one needs relationships. I think we can be so self-serving nowadays with the internet and our phones. It's almost like, well, you don't need anybody else, which obviously is not true. We do need each other. But in work, we need each other because that a sharing of ideas, you just don't know where it's going to learn. And then, for him, I will go back to his framers and speak to him about the project before I shoot it. Well, I'm in the process of shooting it. So before I get round to printing it, I will go to him, speak to him first and get his advice about how I should print.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Connections are so important. I think it's a key thing in every aspect of life, I think. So you're clearly a very passionate photographer with a clear vision of what you want to achieve. But
thanks.
What was it that drew you to cinematography rather than stills photography as a career, that is?
I spent some time working at a photographer store on Great Marlborough Street called Keith Johnson Photographic, which gave me an insight to the selling of, film and papers and all that. And that led on to a summer sort of placement at a printer's that used to be on Wardour Street. They used to be the home of photography, but not so much anymore. And I think I just thought to myself, gosh, am I going to manage to earn a living? I mean, perhaps I was just intimidated by the whole process and not really knowing how I'd channel. I mean, with hindsight, always being 2020, I really should have taken the place I had at London College of Printing, and as it was back then, and that probably would have taken me down the path of photojournalism. But I guess I decided, well, I don't think I am going to be able to earn a living doing this. Maybe this isn't for me. And at the time, during that printing session, I was printing prints of movie stars for a shop that used to be on Great Titchfield Street selling movie memorabilia. And I sort of joined two dots because although I love photography, I used to be an avid movie watcher. And so I was like, And somewhere within there, the suggestion came from a kindly tutor at a sixth form college that I was attending that maybe I should go do film studies as a starting point to figure out what I would do with myself. And I guess that it was a sort of being in college, I could, I believe, I'm always a person that wants to make use of myself and to do things and be helpful. And what little knowledge I had of photography obviously went straight into the camera side of things. They had a small studio there, so I really used to enjoy using the studio cameras. And then, of course, the projects were shot on film, so I had an understanding by that point of what it is to underexpose and overexpose. And so it kind of was 2 and 2 makes 4 in a way.
So how do you progress then from college to actual employment? Actually making some money from the industry.
Yeah, good question. Well, initially I have to say I did leave. I was fortunate that some fellow students had messed up a project. And the people who had invested in the project, they still wanted their project. And I saw the opportunity to shoot that project. And we were very fortunate to win the competition that the project was put into. And that gave us film stock, money to process, and I think we already had access to people with equipment. So we spent, I say we, there's myself and the team of other people, I sort of kind of led us into it. And after that, I moved on to well, let's shoot some music videos, which sounds like so easy, it slips off the tongue. I wouldn't go say first one was a disaster, but it certainly was a steep learning curve for lots of reasons, not least the volume of material that are really needed to make a cracking music video. So that was the first 2 years after leaving college, and just sort of investing time, enthusiasm. That the thing was always well, if we get paid to do it, put as much of the money as we've got into the project, pay ourselves a little bit, but basically investing in the outcome. And that paid off, and that did pay off. We did get signed by a small production company in London, but we were in Manchester and they were in London, and that was there was a minor hurdle. I don't expect it would be the same today, but back then, the distance of not being on the doorstep to pitch for projects and get your face around town.
What sort of era are we talking about?
Late 80s, 90s. So the whole indie music scene in Manchester, sort of, the Hacienda was just hitting its heyday. Bands like the Farm were around. We worked for the Mock Turtles. I'm still really quite proud of what we achieved, to be fair. And it was a sad moment to realise that it run its entire course.
But I mean, music videos were really taking off in those days. Just a whole transitional thing from just watching people on top of the pops miming or, some slightly dodgy camera work going on. But then these really slick videos came along.
Yeah. And there were some absolutely awesome, inspiring. I mean, there was U2's videos were just phenomenal. Yeah. And I know these are all bands from back in the day, but I remember seeing a few from In Excess. There's one from Simply Red. We were I just, played back and forth. Used to record the music show on Saturday mornings and on VHS and just play them back and forth to understand what they were doing and try and figure out the techniques. And of course, a lot of it was in camera in those days. But then eventually the post-production technology was catching up big time. And a lot of it was done in post. So I had a madcap idea because you had to go into the record companies, the marketing department, and pitch for the band. Even though the band, you knew the band wanted to work with you, and I knew I wanted to work with them, you still have to go through the process and pitch to a marketing company who really want their mate to shoot the video, or their boyfriend or their mother or whatever. And I remember sitting this pitching session and thinking, oh my God, we're losing it. We are bloody losing it. And I went, well, how about this for an idea? We put some tattoos on and we bring the tattoos to life. And I remember my sort of partner in crime going, what are you talking about? I was like, and of course they bit because they didn't know what I was talking about either. I reckon they probably thought we'd fail, but very, very fortunately, we had a great editor who knew a chap who worked for a post-production facility. I remember he's called Finley, but I can't remember his last name. Anyway, his partner worked with a piece of technology, I think it was called Henry or Harry, where you could basically rotoscope something that was drawn into real life. Morphing, I think it was called. So it took us on a good journey, a good learning curve journey. So yeah, slip of a tongue. But with a great outcome.
Well, it sounds exciting.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, terrifying. Absolutely terrifying, but quite exciting.
Yeah, fantastic. And then you've progressed from music videos to more film work.
Yeah, so the music video journey came to its own end. And then I was like, whoa, what should I do now? And one thing that had troubled me about the music videos was I was really getting more into the production side. I had become although my creativity still went into them, I'd become the sort of chief cook and bottle washer of the production department. And so I was sort of getting very separated from being on set. So actually the ending of that journey gave me the opportunity to sort of not reinvent myself, but to take a different approach. And I decided, well, I'll aim for the camera department because that's where I think I wanted to be in the first place. And so eventually, after a lot of door knocking, I got breaks to be in-house loader for a couple of production companies who made commercials in Manchester. And that sort of developed kind of reasonably good medium to long-term working relationship with a couple of DPs. And then, my goal was really always to be working in narrative fiction. And so eventually I started assisting for Granada on their television dramas, which back then were all shot on film.
Exciting stuff as well. Now, when you were talking there, a whole load of questions popped into my head. So I was thinking, you were talking about the sort of direction that you got moved in when you were working on music videos. And I just wondered, were you the only woman? Were there any other women working in that area or in your team?
No, well, there was initially, but she went off and started work. She wanted to be in TV, and she took herself off and started working. Do you remember the Hitman and Her?
Oh, yes.
She got her break in TV doing that sort of work. So she went off, which left me and the person who was my partner at the time, as well as in work, and he wasn't going to do the phoning around and the booking and the investigation and the research.
Right.
So that sort of fell to me. But I mean, at the end of the day, as much as I didn't want to be behind a desk, it did mean I found out about stuff. I learned about stuff.
Every organisation needs somebody who can do, or, one person who can do a bit of everything. So you get full coverage, don't you? But sometimes you do end up taking on those mantles that you'd really rather not, just because somebody else absolutely won't.
Yeah. And be on the shoot days, for instance, rather than, being able to just be by the monitor or by the camera, as it was more then, and actually really watching what was going on and paying attention to what we were filming, which were my ideas also. I'd be getting people going, when are we going to have lunch? Where am I going to park the car? When are you going to pay my overtime? We're going to go to overtime. All that sort of...
Yeah.
All that nitty-gritty sort of stuff that no show runs without,
Yeah. And you said that you started work as a loader. I think there's probably a lot of people who don't know what that is.
So a clapper loader. So basically loading film.
Okay.
One of the weird things about the film industry, I think, is that, the weight is I suppose like a house. The weight is on the foundations, and the clapper loader is the bottom of that pyramid, if you like. And it's your responsibility to load the film stock, which, requires quite a lot of knowledge, to be honest, and management skills. And then at the end of the day, download the film stock, as in expose, put it into a can, send it to the labs, and not mess it up.
Yes, not take the lid off to just make sure it's in there and things like that. So how did you work your way up from there?
Gosh, well, early jobs, it would just be me as the loader. And then as you get more experience, you start working with teams of people. And with that just comes more responsibility. And because the more capable you are as a team, the more responsibilities you can take on. And eventually, a lot of the jobs that I did were 2-camera jobs. So there was an expectation that at the drop of a hat, the second camera would come out. And in those moments, I'd be quite often loading for 2 cameras, unless we had a trainee that could bump up, and focus pulling for 1. And so that way you start honing your skills to the next step of the ladder, which is focus pulling. And eventually you go, I don't want to do this loading thing anymore. I'm just going to do focusing.
And what's the next step from focus puller?
The next step from focus puller is camera operating. Or not necessarily, but could be. I mean, if you want to stay in your grade, stay there. There's nothing to say that you have to move on. If it's serving you, then, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. I, however, didn't really have any desires to stay in the clapper loading role. And I did do it for a good many years. Then moved on to focus puller. Now, the next step can be a huge leap. Generally, they'd say move on to camera operator. And at that point, you might go, well, that's the pinnacle of where I want to go. And after camera operator, you could move on to cinematographer or director of photography. I made the giant step for myself because, some people are fortunate and get bumped up just by working in a team, and a gap becomes available and you can just move on. And others of us just have to make a decision. We're just going to do it. And I just decided one day I just had enough. And I was like, God, do I want to now focus pull for another 10 years before I start doing what I want to do, or figuring out working as a cinematographer is what I want to do, or am I just going to take the leap? And coincidentally, a colleague of mine who'd been a loader had stepped up, and he'd done a bit of focusing. He just stepped straight up to being a DP. And I thought, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. Here we go.
You can wait a lifetime to be ready for something, can't you? Or you can just sometimes go for it.
Yeah. And I'm a slow mover, so, I might have taken a long time to make that decision. So really, it was like, well, get on with it. It's going to take you a while anyway, so you might as well start now. So I did.
So what is the life of a cinematographer? What is the role?
That's a big one. So there's lots of interpretations, I think, for where that title comes in. I think typically I'd say a cinematographer is somebody who's involved in visual storytelling. So that could be documentaries and that could be narrative fiction. And of course, cine, typically it would have been cine, but we're in a whole entirely digital world. But I think, the projects, the output of the projects, so short films, you're really looking for something that's going to be broadcast or for theatrical release. I would say that would be the typical expectation of somebody who's calling themselves either a director of photography or a cinematographer. And it is sort of more defined by the output. But of course, it doesn't stop anyway. You choose your title. If you've woken up today thinking you're going to be a cinematographer, well, you are.
Yeah.
Because nobody else makes that decision for you. Does that kind of answer the question? I think I might have gotten off track.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of people who don't really know what a cinematographer or a director of photography does on a day-to-day basis in a set. I mean, it seems to be like the gel between the director and the rest of the crew working that helps deliver a creative vision. But I've never done that job, so I don't know. You might be thinking, no,
that's a pretty good way of putting it. I like that. I think we are the gel. I think so. If you're a cinematographer, I would say you're more likely to be operating the camera and integrally involved in the lighting, and have a close working relationship with the director. A lot of our work goes on, and this is it's documentaries as well, but a lot of work goes on in prep. So if you're talking, you've got to get to know the story, got to get to know the director's wishes, and then it's down to that person to figure out how to best interpret those wishes and bring them to life. What are the visual references? Look at theirs. What are yours? Join it together so you can decide on like the colour and the look. In my personal view, I think the cinematographer is the first audience of a movie before it gets out there. We're not as emotively involved in the story at that point.
We'll be right back after this short break. Please excuse this interruption. This podcast is supported by Canon, a leading technology company founded in Japan in 1937. Canon is dedicated to helping people reimagine and push the boundaries of what is possible through imaging. Canon believes in living and working together for the common good to develop a better society and a more inclusive and equitable world. Let's get back to the episode.
As the director would, so we're not caught up in like, what's the character's motivation for this, that and the other. So we're kind of looking at it, and if things don't add up, then there's a gap.
Right.
I always feel it's up to us. You have to flag that gap, because even if there's no dialogue to fill that gap, or dialogue to fill that gap is unnecessary, that means we have to find the visuals to fill that gap. And that will generally be to support a character's presence and to sort of justify that character's presence within the narrative, or to bring forward like the subtext of the movie.
Okay. Are you personally, generally these days, holding a camera, or are you talking to someone holding a camera? Or operating a camera, I should say.
I've done both. I must admit, I prefer to be holding / operating the camera. And this is where, like, if you're not, you're more a director of photography, and that means you're head of even as a cinematographer, you are head of the department. But what my experiences of being the director of photography are, there is a heck of a lot of, people management. Sometimes one job I did 2 full crews, but the operator is taking the brunt of the planning for the shots, which one's party to, because you've got to try and, hopefully, got a good enough working relationship whereby, the shot that's being designed isn't going to show up all your lights that you inevitably need to put up. And so that frees the director of photography will then be working with the gaffer more specifically to sort of like, keep that team ahead of what the camera department is about to do. So everybody's sort of ready to go, because all these things work in parallel. So there's a lot of time management.
You've mentioned, working as a team, and we've touched on forming connections. And it sounds like, and you mentioned also developing a working relationship with people. There's a lot of collaboration in what you do. So do you find that you work with the same teams or the same people quite regularly because you understand each other's processes and you get on well and you work creatively together? Yeah,
definitely. There's a sort of trust as well, I think, that comes out of that. that you can trust somebody to be cracking on with something. You don't have to be intentionally or unintentionally micromanage them. You're just going to turn around and like, boom, it's going to be done. And also knowing that they understand, one's idiosyncrasies is helpful. Or they know how you want to, you're going to want the monitor over there. You're going to want this on the monitor or that. It's just, it just eases the day, I guess. It's like, same as, your socks are in the bottom drawer and your T-shirts are in the drawer below that or above that,
You're not continually saying 2 sugars or whatever.
Exactly. And, human beings are creatures of habit, aren't we?
Yeah. Just sort of shifting tack slightly. There's been lots of interesting, exciting developments in cameras over the last few years. Is there anything that is sort of coming along or has recently arrived that's been particularly exciting for you, particularly helpful, maybe help with your job?
A DP called, or a cinematographer, I think it's how he prefers to refer to himself, called Ed Lachman, has been working for some years on an exposure tool similar to something that we call false colour, but they're going to be called the EL zone, which more accurately reflects, because a lot on digital cameras we rely either on histograms or waveforms, and some people tend to use false colour, which is a visual representation of that. But a bit like ordinary 7-stop grayscale was superseded, if you like, by Ansel Adams' zone system.
Right.
If you wanted to get your whites white and your blacks black, you tend to use the zone system. Well, so Ed Lachman's scale, which is now built into some monitors, allows us access to that in terms of exposure. So we're not limited to the 18% grey so much. But the thing I'm loving the most is I recently got an R5C because I was waiting for that moment when the technology in cameras was going to balance out a bit and it was worth making the investment. And, I still shoot video, but I still take photographs. I wanted a good hybrid and the R5C landed. So I was like, yes. But the thing that's really excited me about that is that I can now put my FD lenses, which I've been hanging on to for donkey's years. I didn't know whether to sell them or get them rehoused, and I tried various adapters that never worked successfully enough for me to be convinced by it to go from FD to EF bodies. But now, simple little adapter ring onto my R5C and boom, I can use all my FD glass.
Oh, wow. So it's nothing to do with all the autofocus advances that have been made. Your manual focus.
Well, yeah, I'm a manual focus buddy. I mean, yeah, the autofocus stuff is great, and it's amazing technology. And the R5C, I mean, phenomenal things around that is it's got false colour built into it, so from the video side, and it does have very intuitive autofocus. But I guess when I'm taking photographs now, they are much more considered. I am much more in control and purposeful about what I'm taking a photograph of. So I'm not out there. I guess they're sort of, I don't know, it sounds like a bit of a grandiose title, but they're more fine art photographs. So I'm I'm slower and being more purposeful about what I'm doing with it. So the focus being done for me is less important.
Fine. So does the false colour on the R5C work in stills mode as well as video mode? I've not tried it.
That I don't know, actually.
Okay. But I asked because I have used a Phase 1 camera in the past that I could use false colour with and stills. And it kind of changed my experience, well, how I felt about the photographs. I felt a bit like a data gatherer rather than a photographer. It was slightly different. I can absolutely see the benefits for video, obviously.
I think in a way we are data gatherers.
Mm.
And were we not when it was film? I don't know. I didn't ever feel like that on film, but sometimes with video it definitely does. With digital.
Yeah.
It really definitely does feel like that. And in terms of stills, one of the big issues I faced with the project I did with flowers was that they had to be against complete darkness. They had to be in darkness. They just... Obviously, they weren't because they're illuminated, but it was really important you didn't see the light. And so at that point, I was working at very low levels of light, And with red flowers, that became problematic. It took a lot of investigations to figure out how to stop the red bleeding into the other channels. Because when it did, you got this sort of phosphorescent effect to the picture, which I most definitely didn't want. I mean, and by using talking of data, which is where we're at, by using the histogram, I could see where the red channel was jumping over into the green, and that's what was causing the phosphorescence.
We often rely on just the overall histogram, don't we? But being able to break it down and see RGB is really, really useful, particularly in that instance.
Yeah. And then nowadays, I think I'd be inclined to put in a colour chart because, of course, if you're doing your own printing, it's not a problem because you know what colour red you're seeing. But if somebody else is doing your printing, I now would be dropping in a colour chart just because I want it to be that red. Or, the colours now have no numbers that are in all the editing software that we use, whether it's Photoshop or DaVinci. It's all in there, so it's trackable.
Well, I think it might be a good time to go to 6 from SheClicks. So I've got 10 questions from SheClickers. I would really like you to answer 6 of them, please, by choosing numbers from 1 to 10. So can I have your first number, please?
Let's go for 10.
Number 10, okay. Right, a few people asked this one. What has been the highlight of your career so far?
Well, I think very recently, the success of an indie film that I shot has just done phenomenally well at festivals. And it's a highlight because it's so rewarding to see all the love and attention and that went into the film reflecting back in its success. So, I'm super happy about that. And it's extremely rewarding also to do something that people enjoy.
Congratulations on that. So you'll have to tell us the name of the film.
Thank you. Verdigris. It's doing its festival journey at the moment. I'm not sure where it goes next. It's just been in Cork Film Festival. I'm not sure where it goes next.
So is it likely to be in cinemas at some point or on TV or something so everyone can see it?
I think it's probably likely to go onto a streamer. But I think the first year tends to be committed to festivals to sort of build up its presence and for it to get known by people who sort of buy and sell movies. And then after that, it'll go on to a platform, but I don't know which. The Contestant, which is a documentary I shot, which, by the way, if you get the opportunity to see it, is a really great documentary directed by Claire Titley. And it just is phenomenal. It's, I think Rolling Stone said it's the movie of the year for them. And that's been bought by Hulu. And it's a major. That's also... So I think this year it's those 2 films are just phenomenal.
Okay, so The Contestant and Verdigris.
Yeah.
Okay. So could I have another number, please?
Oh, let's go for 3.
Number 3. Oh, what is the thing that a cinematographer does that would surprise someone who's not a cinematographer? That question's from Liz.
Probably all the script breakdown work. Probably all of that. So we can read through the script, as I mentioned earlier. So we work with the director to build the visual narrative, but we're looking for subtext to bring to the visual narrative. So it's script breakdown, looking for beats and turning points. Yeah, I'd probably say that's the one thing that probably people don't expect cinematographers to be doing.
Yeah, kind of piecing it all together in your head, in a way.
Yeah, it was more like finding meaning and flow, and using and the rhythm within the film, and then finding the shots that will support that rhythm. So if you've got a dramatic moment, say, somebody's going to break into a room, you probably want a close-up of the door handle. But, the director might be more focused on the character's response, which makes sense because you want to see the character's response. But we'd have to be going, no, we need the door handle shot. So it's those sort of things.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Sounds like that's quite a long process.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm about to do a short film, and we're just kind of going through all those things at the moment. And the he's open to it, which is good, but even he's a little bit like, really, do we need it? I'm like, yeah, you're going to need it in the edit. So we've got to supply material to the editor so that they can move this way or that way, kind of like having eyes in the back of your head.
Could I have your third number, please?
What should the third number be? 7.
7. Okay. What's your work schedule like? Do you spend a lot of time away from home, for instance?
Can do, yeah. And the hours are long. So you're on set for, at least you're on set for breakfast for 7:30. So that probably means you're on set at 7. You might get away on wrap, but wrap is around about 7 o'clock, 6, 7 o'clock. But the chances are you'll probably have a meeting afterwards. So yeah, you don't see much of the outside world during that time.
And how long does that go on for?
It really depends on the project. So, Verdigris was shot in Dublin. So I was in Dublin for, I think, best part of a month. And often we're working 6-day weeks. So you're either like away, gone, or rattling around the place being a nuisance.
Okay. Can I have your fourth number, please?
Let's go for number 1.
Number 1. Okay. What camera or lens have you owned but have let go and you'd like to get back?
I'm a hoarder. I don't let go of anything.
Hence, you've got your FD lenses.
Yeah. Until I'm really convinced it just does not serve me anymore. I mean, I've still got my 7D.
Right.
It's not useless, but the chip technology has changed so much, and I've done a lot of, it's had a lot of clicks, as they say. But it's my, for a photographer or a cinematographer, like, it's an inanimate object which I'm heavily invested in. I think that's the thing. So I find it incredibly difficult to get rid of. And there's always so I don't. And I have my great uncle's Nikon. I've just been handed somebody's in the family was giving away their Canon AE1, I think it is.
Nice.
You just can't.
No. What about the camera you were given when you were 7? Have you still got that? Or the 35mm you were given?
Now, that is a good question. That's going to get me ferreting around in the loft, because I'm fairly convinced that yes would be the answer to that. Probably do,
Great. I've still got a box brownie I bought for 15p when I was about 10. It wasn't new for 15p, I should point out. It was secondhand then. I'm not that old.
But then the other thing is you just don't know the value of it. I mean, the FD lenses, to all intents and purposes, once we switched to digital, had no value. And then people started looking for lenses with an aesthetic. Because obviously, as we went digital, everything got super, super crisp.
Yes.
And like no shallow depth of field. And then eventually people were like, well, you know what? How am I going to bring myself into this project if everything's so clean? So people started looking for ways to be creative, and vintage lenses were that. So although I thought of selling them, my heart wasn't in it. And then I thought of getting them rehoused, which is phenomenally expensive and quite a lengthy process, but, potentially worthwhile. But now I can use them on my R5. So it's brilliant. It's a win-win.
Absolutely. So your penultimate number then, please.
I think I've had one from the top and one from the bottom, and then let's go for number 2 then.
Okay, right. This is a fun one. You have 2 days completely free of work. What are you going to shoot? So this is just for you, for fun.
Well, actually, what I would really like to be able to do is hop on a plane, go to a city that I've not yet worked in Morocco, and continue with that project and have 2 clear days to do that. And can I take a minder with me, please? Yeah, that's what I would just like to do.
Yeah. And are you photographing people or places or objects or landscapes? I won't continue to guess. What are you shooting?
It's situations, I suppose, circumstances. So again, there can be a character or a person in the shot, and 9 times out of 10 there is. It's not street, or I'm shooting on the street. It's not a street look, so they can't be doing anything. I guess it's sort of more kind of neoclassical type approach. So they're still lives. So they've got to embody, I guess, elements from the neoclassical style of painting. And that's what I'm working on at the moment. That's the project I've got to finish.
Oh, I look forward to seeing it.
Thank you.
Okay, so your last number then, please.
8.
As you were inspired at an early age, Carmen would like to know if you have any advice about how to inspire children to become interested in the world of photography. She's got a young son that she really wants to encourage into photography.
I think accessibility is really important, like accessibility to the tools, encouragement, but purposeful encouragement, if you see what I mean. It's, if something's good, then find what is good about it.
Yeah.
Don't be sort of too carte blanche about it, because any artist, whatever they're shooting, is their own critic, has to be able to critique their work, has to be able to understand where and how to develop. Books would always be a go-to, and trying to help that person to evolve a style. What's their interest? Some people are into still life, some people into rock bands, some people are into street, and then there's always animals. So I think finding the outlet for his photography that is authentic to him.
Good advice, I think. Yeah, and I particularly like the bit about not being too sort of generic with your praise. I've come across quite a few people who obviously told as children they're great singers, and you think you're really not, but you need to be positively encourage people in the right direction sometimes. And, if they're not doing so well, then help them understand why.
Yeah, because there's a lot about photography that is technical, using depth of field, for instance, or do you want to underexpose? Do you want to overexpose, and why? And if you're going to overexpose, what aesthetic are you trying to achieve by that overexposure? Would diffusing that shot enhance overexposing it? And then looking at, types of lighting. Do you want it to be hard? Do you want it to be soft? What's the feeling? I mean, Jane Bowen, and this is where those photojournalists who did portraits are incredibly useful. I mean, Jane Bowen is a good one to look at, and just to explore how initially you respond to that picture will give you the pathway to understanding what that person did to that picture to elicit that emotional response from you.
Yeah, good advice. Well, Tania, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. It's been wonderful hearing from you.
Thank you. It's been an absolute joy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the SheClicks Women in Photography podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. You'll find links to Tania's website and social media channels in the show notes. I'll be back with another episode soon, so please subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform and tell all your friends and followers about it. You'll also find SheClicks on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube if you search for SheClicksNet. So until next time, enjoy your photography.